Okay.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the History Valley Podcast with your host, Jacob Berman. Today I'm joined by frequent guest, David Mirsch. He's the author of the book, The Open Tomb. The link to his book is in the description. So this is a Q&A live stream. So if anybody have any questions for David Mirsch and what he's going to be talking about now, feel free to super chat questions. Remember, super chat questions are the only questions I'll be answering. So if anybody wants to ask questions, you have to super chat it, or they will not be read. Okay, David. Give us a trip through the medical analysis. Well, this is obviously going to be touching on the swoon theory, but I want to start off with Joseph and Asenath, and work our way up. Because you found some interesting medical scenarios here, and I know you've spoken to an expert or two about that as well. So start us off.
Well, this mostly relates to, as far as the medical is concerned, the blood problems that Jesus seems to have suffered according to the Gospels. When he was under stress the night before his crucifixion, he was sweating blood. And when he was on the cross and he was stuck with a spear, the Gospels indicate that water and blood came out of the wound. Those are both indications of hemolytic anemia. In other words, the red blood cells break down with certain medical conditions. And so the fluid that's in the red blood cells comes into the bloodstream and appears as if it's water and blood. Not separate, but that it's kind of watery blood. The thing that connects that to the story of Asenath is that when she is under stress in the story, she too sweats blood. So she too suffers from hemolytic anemia. In the course of my research, I spoke to one of the nation's top hematologists, a doctor down in La Jolla, California. And I asked him specifically about, hemolytic anemia and a genetic malfunction that some people suffer from called G6PD, which is otherwise known as favism, because it can be triggered by eating fava beans. And one of the primary symptoms of that is hemolytic anemia. Now, favism is found throughout the Mediterranean region, but it is very prevalent in Jewish populations in the Eastern Mediterranean. And one of the features of favism is that it is generally passed from mother to son. Now, in the case of Asenath, there are other things that connect her to Jesus' mother Mary. In fact, her name, Asenath, is based on an Egyptian goddess named Neith or Neph. And that was referred to in ancient times as the Virgin Mother Goddess. So I think Asenath is a real representation of Jesus' mother, and that the blood problem that he suffered was directly from his mother Mary. It was handed down genetically from his mother to him. One of the interesting things, and it's a very minor point, but in the Gospels, the night before Jesus goes through his trial and everything, when he and his disciples are having their dinner, Gospels indicate that he ate bread, but they do not indicate like unleavened bread. They do not say matzah or anything like that, and they do not say leavened bread. So he was eating some kind of bread that wasn't unleavened and it wasn't leavened. And the only other kind of bread he might have been eating at that supper would have been Ezekiel's bread of atonement, which is made from various grains, spelt, and certain beans that are dried and crushed. And one of the ingredients is fava beans. So if Jesus was eating that bread made with fava beans, that would have triggered his favism and would have contributed to him having a breakdown of the red blood cells in his bloodstream. And therefore he would have, sweated blood. He would have had water and blood coming out of the spear wound. That's pretty much it. I mean, you can look up G6PD, you can look up favism.
You can verify these facts pretty easily. And it seems to blend in with what the Gospels were portraying and what the story of Asenath portrayed as well. It would be very, very unusual. And I think the story of Asenath the long version was written in the 1st century. It would be very, very unusual to have two people who have stories written about them, and they both suffer from favism. That kind of coincidence would be extremely rare unless they were related genetically or they were related philosophically. In other words, they used the sweating of blood in Asenath to connect her to Jesus philosophically. But it's much more likely that there was a genetic component there.
And when it comes to the swim theory of Jesus surviving the crucifixion, how do you view what kind of medical analysis indicates that? How does that apply here? Basically, that's what I'm asking you.
Well, it wouldn't directly impact, I don't think, it wouldn't directly impact how Jesus and his closest followers would have achieved the swoon on the cross per se. He would have been given other drugs on the sponge that was offered to him by a bystander in the crowd. That would have put him into a death-like coma situation. It would have affected him as far as fatigue is concerned, so that when he is being interviewed by Antipas and Pilate, he doesn't really say much. He is very, very stoic, doesn't answer much as far as their questions are concerned. And that could have been part of the process of the favism affecting how he behaved. He would have, with that kind of blood disorder, he would have been very fatigued and had, some difficulty staying alert and being able to respond to questions.
What other people were involved in that scenario? Which other people?
In the swoon theory? I think he was prepared for this as a child. I think part of the reason that the family went to Egypt was to prepare Jesus. And I also think he was a Nazirite. And a Nazirite is somebody who makes a vow to God that they do not cut their hair, shave, use alcohol, anything like that. There are strict guidelines to being a Nazirite. And they have to stay a Nazirite until they complete whatever pledge they have made to God. So I think for most of his life, Jesus was a Nazirite. He was prepared by his father and his mother, more than likely. There would have been people behind the scenes that created certain things like the wine urns or vases that were used at the wedding at Cana. Would have taken somebody with special skills to create those. obviously the bystander that rushed up to him to give him the sponge with drugs on it would have been involved with him. So he had I would say, a pretty close-knit circle of people that were all moving in the same direction and all trying to achieve the same goals. And this had been something that he'd been prepared for since he was a child.
Prepared for since he was a child. Are you suggesting that like this situation has been planned for a very long time, even
Yes.
though going that far back?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. And the Gospels talk about his knowledge of Torah was extensive, beyond what would have been required apparently from a bar mitzvah and that kind of learning. He sits on the steps of the temple, basically educating, the men around him, the priests that are there, and telling them things about Torah that, for somebody his age would have been very, very surprising. So I think, this was something that went on throughout his childhood. I think his father had an idea of what he wanted to accomplish with his son. And I think his son, bought into it and went along with it. And that was his goal too.
Do you think this had to do with the messianic fever, that the Jews were expecting the Messiah to arrive in the 1st century CE as per Daniel's prophecy? Daniel's calculations that he's going to show up exactly in that century, and they were like, we gotta go around and find this guy. We gotta make this guy real at any cost, even to make him look divine, by making him survive an execution.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. It's not just meeting that prophetic expectation. It's a way to impress upon the population that God is on their side. God is on Jesus's side because God raises him from the dead. And that would be, or should have been, a real eye-opener for the population to know about that and to see that happen. Yeah, I think those two things, he was trying to fulfill that prophecy, and he was also trying to impress the population that God was on his side and raised him from the dead. Absolutely. And I think that was the plan all along. I think it was necessary. I think if you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's one of the primary things that you take away from that, is that the Essenes really anticipated that God would somehow come out and be on their side and help them win military victories. The difference with Jesus and John the Baptist and the people in that group with the Essenes was that the Essenes were very fatalistic. In other words, they weren't going to push it. They were just going to assume that God was going to show up at a certain time and let the Essenes know that the time was now to start the revolt. I think Jesus was more proactive than that. And I think that John the Baptist was much more proactive. And I think John specifically was an Essene at one point. And I think he really got tired of, waiting and being fatalistic about this. Because if you look at the description of him, he's only eating wild foods and dressed in animal skins. And one of the vows you took as an Essene was that you could not eat prepared foods from somebody else if you left or were kicked out of the Essenes. You could not do that. So he was forced to eat, wild food. And I think that's just a sign of where those two, were coming from.
Yeah, there's some people saying that my mic level is too loud. Okay. Just do a little audio check real quick.
Yeah, you were rattling a little bit.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. So here's another question that I have for you. This is not one I don't think I've ever asked you before on any of our previous discussions, including the unreleased ones. When do you think the swoon was first planned in history? When do you think that they started planning this? What caused them to plan it?
Well, that's a tough one to call. I don't know that there's anything definitive that would point to a particular time. As I've said to you before, I'm convinced that Jesus and his father were temple priests. I think ultimately his father Joseph became high priest of the temple. There were two. Well, I don't want to go off track here. So as far as I kind of feel, this could have happened from Jesus's birth in 6 BCE, that his father had some idea of trying to rid the Torah followers of the Roman occupation. And the Roman occupation really began in that area in 63 BCE. So well before Joseph would have been born. So he had lived under their occupation, Roman occupation, for his whole life. And as a priest and as really a holy man, he would have seen that occupation as problematic for sure. So he may have, when he had a son, looked at prophecy and said, you know, here's somebody, here's my son that I can train, that I can, you know, teach, that we could put into action to start a revolt against the Romans. And that wouldn't have been too far-fetched for somebody that was, you know, under Roman occupation to plan that far ahead and say, you know what, we need to get them out of here. And this is a really good way to do it. You know, Jesus was born at a propitious time to fulfill prophecy. You know, let's move in that direction.
And do you think, like, in the 8030s, when Jesus, after he survived the crucifixion, and because as you know, the Gospels have him not only being in conflict with the Romans, but also with the Jewish authorities.
Right.
So do you think there were Jews that were against the plan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There would have been. I think that certainly parts of his family, if what I say is true about his father and Jesus being temple priests, the other priests, including Annas, the other high priest, would have been very much against this. So would the wealthier parts of society, because they made their money with the approval of the Romans. In other words, their lifestyle was tied into Roman occupation, even though they may have pushed back at certain points where, like Pilate and others, might have insulted their religious views by trying to put in iconic images into Jerusalem and the temple and what have you. Overall, they would have wanted the status quo to continue because that was their lifestyle, that paid for their lifestyle. So yeah, they would have absolutely been against what Jesus was proposing. Now, the interesting thing would be that they would have more than likely understood the messages in his sayings, whereas the Romans might not have understood those things. Could the Jews have gone to the Romans and said, hey, this guy is, you know, really preaching about this? Yeah, they might have, but that would have increased Roman scrutiny on all the Jews. And that's probably not something that the wealthier people in that society would have wanted. again, they don't want to upset the apple cart. They want things to continue the way they have been so that they can enjoy their lifestyle. And I think this is why in the Gospels that Jesus's family thinks he's crazy, that they don't want to start a rebellion. They're living pretty well. And the last thing they want to do is upset that apple cart and create problems. So they thought he was crazy. Ultimately, they came around to him. I think some of them did. Certainly his father and mother were supportive.
How do you feel about the Soon theory in general at the moment, like how it's doing in terms of reception? Do you think eventually it'll gain more traction in the future?
I'm not going to, I can't predict the future. Should it? Yes, it definitely should gain traction, because the records, the ancient records, the Gospels, what have you, Josephus, they point to this being the case. They make it in their own way pretty clear that this is what happened. This is what transpired, was that he swooned on the cross, appeared dead, was taken down. There has to be an explanation for a crucified victim disappearing, the body disappearing. There has to be an explanation for that, because as I said to you a little while ago, that's what triggers everything. And without that, you really wouldn't know about Jesus. People know about Jesus today because of that, because he apparently died on the cross and then was seen alive. I'm not a big person on miracles. I know there are arguments, miracles happen, yes, yeah. No, I'm not big on that. So there had to be some kind of natural explanation for why he disappeared from the tomb. And I'll tell you something else that's really interesting to me, and that is that throughout the Gospels, his miracles are laid out. They're very, they're clear. People see them, witness what he's doing. The big one, the resurrection, the one that would put him on the map, is not witnessed. Nobody sees the resurrection. That's pretty telling to me. That's, if you're making up a myth about Jesus, that he's a mythic person, why wouldn't you describe his resurrection? If he's historical, why wasn't anything written about his resurrection? Was there a flash of light? Was there noise? Was there this? Was there that? There were no witnesses to it, which tells me that it was not a miraculous thing. It was a sleight of hand magical trick. And since there were no witnesses, there's nobody there to describe what might or might not have happened. To me, he's put in the tomb. He's right away taken out of the tomb before they even close the tomb. And he's kind of skirted off, gotten out of there. They close up the tomb. I think in Mark and Luke, the tomb is found open because the realization is there that if they don't open the tomb and show that it's empty, nobody's going to believe there's been a resurrection. Well, the body could still be in the tomb. Well, we don't know because it's closed up. No, somebody came along, and I assume it was his father, and opened the tomb so people could see that his body was gone, so that they could claim there'd been a resurrection. Matthew corrected that by having the tomb closed when the women came on Sunday, because that made it seem more miraculous that he had resurrected through the walls of the tomb, that the door had, the rolling stone had not been opened, that he had somehow resurrected outside of the tomb.
All right. Final question. How long do you think? I mean, do you think the Gospels are correct? He was on the cross for about 3 days before he was taken down and survived, or do you think it could have been longer or shorter?
Well, the indication is that he was on the cross for 6 hours. That he was crucified at 9 in the morning and declared dead at 3 in the afternoon.
Oh, yeah, I got it mixed up. If he was thought to be dead for 3 days. I thought he was entombed. Yeah.
Well,
from 3 days to rise.
My research indicates that he was probably crucified not on Good Friday, but on Thursday. And scholars have tried to mitigate the fact that if he's crucified on Good Friday, that he's not in the earth, he's not in the tomb for 3 full days. Okay, and they've come up with, well, back then they used to consider part of a day a full day, and that's why, he was in there from, late Thursday through to Sunday. And no, he was in there for a full 3 days. And so he had to have been crucified and declared dead earlier in the week, not on the Friday. And that actually works out so that, he is in the earth for 3 days. Scholars have a tendency to get into manipulating the information. And I tried not to do that as much as I could. I tried to look at it independently of, what other scholars had come up with and say, well, if that's the case, why isn't it this type of an approach to it? Anyway.
All right, then. Thank you for joining me on the live stream. Until then, everybody, I've been Jacob Berman from History Valley Podcast. Check the description. Check his Amazon page, David's Amazon page, for if any of you want to go buy his book, The Open Tomb. Don't forget to subscribe, like I was just saying a moment ago, and I shall see all you later.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.